They say the worst day of your life doesn't come with a warning. No thunderclap. No villain twirling a mustache. Just a calendar square you thought was Tuesday, maybe a meatloaf night. And then, boom, the floorboards of your soul get yanked out. For me, it was a Wednesday. Steak night. Ashley called it a serious talk. Said we needed to meet at La Vigna, some upscale place with napkins so stiff they could double as origami weapons. Thought she wanted to patch things up. You know, rekindle something. I even trimmed my beard, wore the shirt she always said brought out my eyes. Spoiler alert, she didn't notice. When I arrived, she was already seated. But she wasn't alone. Logan, she smiled, motioning across the table like this was a business lunch and not the implosion of a decade-long marriage. This is Chase. Chase wore a black button-down so tight it looked vacuum-sealed. His smirk was thicker than the steak tartare I never got to order. I knew the name. Heard it a dozen times. My work minner, she'd say. Just a friend. The kind of friend who apparently now came with candlelight and a wine list. Nice to finally meet you, he said, extending a hand I had zero interest in shaking. Ashley talks about you a lot. I sat down because standing would have made the shaking in my legs too obvious. Ashley folded her hands. I wanted this to be civil. Honest. That's when Chase leaned forward, his tone smooth and predatory. You've got two options, Logan. Leave quietly, or face me like a man. You ever hear a record scratch in real life? That was my brain. Just white noise and rage. I looked at Ashley, expecting her to flinch, to apologize, to say this was a joke. Instead, she smiled. So I stood up. Calm. Collected. My voice dropped an octave. You want your teeth whole or in pieces? That's when I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. This was choreography. A premeditated humiliation, and I had walked right into their dinner theater. The next part is a blur, plate shattered. Chase got a face full of glassware, and Ashley screamed like I'd embarrassed her. Security dragged me out while Chase crumpled to the ground like week-old bread. That night, outside under a flickering street lamp, I realized something. This wasn't the beginning of an affair. This was the final act. The streetlights blurred behind my eyes as I stood there, cold air biting at my skin, trying to steady the trimmer in my hands. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. Just hollow, like I'd been drained of something vital. I walked back to the house I thought was mine, but the moment I stepped inside, I realized it wasn't. The bed was too neat, corners sharp as knives. Ashley never made the bed like that. Not really. A faint perfume hung in the hallway. Not hers. Something darker. My phone buzzed. A message. From her. You didn't have to do that. No apology. No guilt. Just that cold jab, like she was reminding me who had the upper hand. I didn't reply. I sat down at the kitchen table and started digging. First, the shoe rack. Heels I'd never seen before. Expensive and definitely not mine to worry about. Then, the tablet she always left unlocked. I thought trust was a given, but I was wrong. The first picture made my chest tighten. A mirror selfie, hotel room, barely dressed, lips pouted like she was sending a postcard from betrayal. Swipe. There he was, Chase, shirtless, brushing his teeth. Casual like he lived there. There were videos, voice notes. His deep, smug voice calling her my little secret. Her laughter, light and almost cruel. She had been lying to me for months. Years, maybe. And now, here it was, laid bare. I stared at the screen, heart pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it through the walls. Then I heard the door open. Ashley didn't even look up. So, she said, cool as ice. Found what you were looking for? I swallowed hard. Why, Ashley? Why play me like this? She shrugged, like it was no big deal. Maybe I was tired of pretending. I wanted to scream. To break something. Instead, I sat back down. Because the fight had only just begun. Days turned into a strange kind of war zone. No yelling, no slam doors. Just the cold, sharp silence that hangs heavier than any argument. Ashley acted like nothing had changed, pouring coffee, texting with that same smug little grin, pretending I was the one out of line. I'd catch her sometimes, the way her eyes would flicker when she thought I wasn't watching, like she was savoring some private joke. One evening, I cornered her in the kitchen. We need to talk, I said, voice low but steady. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. About what? You've made your point. No. I mean us. What's left? She laughed, the kind of laugh that cuts and scars. Left? Logan, we're done. You just don't know it yet. I shook my head. You think this is just about you? About the thrill? What about us? What about the years? She softened for a moment, just a flicker, but it was gone before I could grab it. Years don't mean much when the heart isn't in it. Did you ever love me? Her eyes flashed. You didn't see. Maybe you didn't want to. The bitterness was real now, raw and cold. I took a breath, forced myself to stay calm. Fine. Then let's end it. But I'm not walking away broken. She smirked. That's what scares me. For the first time, I saw it. The fear beneath the arrogance. Because she knew that once this was over, I wouldn't just disappear. I wasn't the man she thought she could break. I didn't want this fight. Hell, I never wanted to fight her, not really. I wanted the woman I married. The woman who once looked at me like I hung the stars. But that woman was gone. And in her place was a stranger who'd built a secret world, one where I was an afterthought, a joke, a shadow she was ready to leave behind. The first few days after our kitchen confrontation, I walked through the house like a ghost. I'd make coffee, fix dinner, answer her questions about work and the kids, but inside, my mind was a thunderstorm. I kept asking myself, how did I miss it? The signs, the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the scent of perfume that wasn't mine. I thought I was a good husband, a good man, but I was wrong. Or maybe just blind. I spent nights scrolling through our old photos on my phone, the vacations, birthdays, silly selfies. Faces frozen in smiles, frozen in time, pretending nothing was wrong. It was like watching a home movie where you already know the ending. She never hid her affair the way some people might. There was a careless boldness to it that burned the whole thing into my memory. The texts, the calls, the messages I'd seen accidentally pop up while she thought I was distracted. One night, I caught myself staring at the ceiling long after she had fallen asleep beside me. The bed felt too big, too cold. The silence between us was deafening. I wondered what it was like for her to sneak around, to lie, to betray. Did she feel guilt? Shame? Or was it all just excitement? A rush she couldn't resist? I decided I couldn't keep living like this, in a house that was a prison of secrets and lies. I needed answers. Not from her. I already knew the truth, but from myself. I started keeping a journal. Not to write her name in venom, but to untangle the chaos in my head. I wrote about the memories, the anger, the moments I wished I could undo. I also hired a private investigator. I know sounds like a cliché in these stories. But I needed facts. Real ones. No more guesswork. Emerson Burke was her name, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She didn't sugarcoat things. After a week of following Ashley, she called me. It's worse than you think, Emerson said. I've documented every meeting, every text, every hotel. This isn't a fling. It's a full-blown affair. It hurt like a punch to the ribs, but I thanked her. Because knowledge was power, even if it tasted bitter. At the same time, I started planning. Not for violence or revenge. Not yet. I planned for the moment I'd take control again. I cleaned up my act. Got back to the gym, shed the extra pounds I'd ignored while trying to make the marriage work. I started dressing sharper, moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Friends noticed. They asked what was going on. I told them little, just enough to explain the new energy. But the truth was, I was preparing for war, the war of reclaiming my dignity, my life, my future. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat her down. Ashley, we need to talk, I said. No anger, no accusation. Just cold, calm resolve. She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I know about him. I know about everything. Her face flickered, a moment of panic, then the mask of indifference slid back on. So, she shrugged. What are you going to do? Cry? Beg? I'm done, Logan. No, I said firmly. I'm not begging. I'm not crying. I'm taking back what you tried to steal from me. She narrowed her eyes. You're bluffing. I leaned in, voice low. Watch me. From that moment on, the house was a battlefield of wills. She tried to provoke me, snide remarks, late nights out, flaunting the affair in ways both subtle and not. But I didn't rise to it. Instead, I held steady. I kept my focus on the plan. I worked with my lawyer, gathering evidence Emerson provided, preparing for divorce and custody. I told myself, no matter what happens, I will not let her break me. Yet, beneath the surface, the rage simmered. It was quiet, patient, like a coiled snake waiting for the right moment. The night I found the hotel receipt slipped between her credit card statements was the moment I realized something else was at play. This wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about her arrogance. She thought she could walk away clean, untouched, that I would simply pack up and disappear. But I had a different idea. The following weeks, I made a choice. Not to be a victim, not to be the fool, I decided to become the storm she never saw coming. They say the worst betrayals aren't shouted. They're whispered in silence and sealed in cold stares. For weeks, the house felt like a mausoleum, every corner holding a memory and a knife. Ashley and I existed in the same space, but the distance between us grew wider than any ocean. I focused on the plan, but the weight of what she'd done was relentless. One evening, I sat alone in the dim light of our living room, nursing a bourbon. The bottle was almost empty, but that wasn't the point. It was about the quiet. The hours when no one was watching, no one interrupting the thoughts that twisted like vines around my mind. I pictured that dinner, the smirk on Chase's face, Ashley's cold smile as she introduced him like a trophy. I pictured the late nights she spent slipping out, the texts she hid, the laughter she shared behind my back. And then I pictured myself, quiet, controlled, and counting every move. I wasn't a man who believed in letting things slide, not when the foundation of your life is being dismantled beneath you. I called Emerson. "We need to escalate," I said. "Everything you've got. Every meeting, every message, every transaction. I want it all." "Logan, this isn't just infidelity anymore," Emerson warned. "It's business. She's been transferring assets, opening accounts, hiding money. This is calculated." The truth hit me like a freight train. Not only had she betrayed me in the bed and the heart, she was trying to bleed me dry. I gritted my teeth. Then we make sure she doesn't get away with a dime. Meanwhile, I started reclaiming my space, cleaning out her things from the bedroom drawer, moving her clothes from the closet. I didn't do it angrily. I did it like a man reclaiming what was rightfully his. She confronted me one morning, voice sharp as a razor. "What the hell are you doing?" "Making room," I said simply. "For what?" "For what comes next." She didn't answer, just stared. That was the moment I realized the power had shifted. Ashley had thought she controlled the narrative. She was wrong. I told my lawyer to file for divorce the next day. Custody arrangements, asset freezes, protective orders. The legal machine started grinding, and I was ready. But this wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. Every time Ashley looked at me, I saw a flicker of fear. She knew I was no longer the man who'd been blindsided. I was the man who would make her pay, not with violence, but with precision. Every late-night phone call I made was calculated. Every meeting with my lawyer was another move on the chessboard. One evening, Ashley tried to bait me. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" She sneered as I packed my gym bag. "I'm just getting started," I said, voice calm. She laughed, cold and bitter. "You'll break. You always do." I smiled, a slow, measured smile. Not this time. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, whispered phone calls, and meetings in sterile offices. But beneath the surface, something darker brewed. I wasn't content with just winning the legal battle. I wanted to strip away her arrogance, to show her that betrayal cuts both ways. I found myself driving late at night to that hotel where Emerson caught her slipping away with Chase. I sat in the shadows, watching the place like a hawk. I learned their habits, their patterns. I noted every detail, license plates, shifts, excuses. Ashley thought she was untouchable, that she could keep her secrets behind locked doors. But I was learning her game, and I was ready to play. One night, as rain pattered on the windshield, I waited in the darkness. Chase pulled up in his car, lights dimmed. Ashley stepped out, hair wet, eyes tired. They embraced like nothing had changed. But this time, I didn't step forward. I let the cold settle in my bones and waited. Because this wasn't about confrontation. It was about control. I drove away, mind racing. I had evidence now, photos, videos, records. Enough to dismantle her carefully constructed lie. But more than that, I was reclaiming my power. The power she thought she had stolen. Back home, I started drafting the letters. Not just legal notices. Letters that would be sent to friends, family, coworkers. A story told on my terms. Because if she wanted to make this public, I'd be louder, more brutal, more unrelenting. I thought about the future, what I wanted it to look like. Not just a man beaten and broken, but a man reborn. A man who stood tall while his betrayer stumbled in the ruins. I wasn't naive. I knew the road ahead would be rough. There would be pain, heartbreak, moments I wanted to give up. But I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would not be a footnote in her story. I would write the final chapter myself. I remember the night clearly. The kind of night where the air feels thick, like it's holding its breath with you. Ashley thought I was sleeping when I slipped out. She was sprawled across the bed, phone in hand, probably texting Chase or some new distraction. The room smelled faintly of her perfume and regret. I didn't say a word as I grabbed my coat and the folder of evidence from the desk. It wasn't just photos anymore. There were bank statements, emails, messages, enough to paint a damning picture that no court could ignore. I drove through the city, each red light a beat in the drum of my resolve. The first stop was the lawyer's office. I handed over everything. "Make sure this hits every place it needs to," I said. He nodded, already pulling up contacts. From there, I headed to the bank. Ashley had been clever, moving money around, but not clever enough. With the freeze in place, she was cut off. No withdrawals, no transfers. I smiled. Not because I was cruel, but because I was taking back control. Back in the car, I thought about Ashley, how she'd underestimated me. How she thought I was a doormat, a sucker, a fool. She was wrong. I planned the next moves carefully. No rash actions, no empty threats. Just a steady, calculated dismantling of the life she tried to hide behind. The following days were a blur of meetings, calls, and quiet observation. I wasn't chasing Ashley. I was watching. I learned her routines, her contacts, the way she tried to keep the pieces from falling apart. But the cracks were there. They were widening. One evening, I sat in a quiet cafe across from the bar where Ashley often met Chase. I watched as she entered, laughing too loudly, arms wrapped around him like she just won. It stung. Not because I cared anymore, but because I knew the price she'd pay. Weeks later, the legal papers arrived. Divorce proceedings, custody requests, financial claims. Everything I needed to ensure she couldn't walk away unscathed. But I didn't stop there. I sent copies of the evidence to her firm, her closest friends, even her family. I wasn't cruel. I was honest. The truth was out. Ashley's world began to unravel. Her colleagues whispered. Friends distanced themselves. Family calls stopped. I didn't gloat. I kept my distance. But the satisfaction of seeing her forced to face the consequences was undeniable. One night, she confronted me. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice cracked. "For you to understand," I said calmly, "that actions have consequences." She looked defeated. For once, the arrogant mask fell away. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "Maybe not," I replied. But it did. That night was the last time we spoke without anger. The divorce was finalized months later. I got custody of the kids, the house, and the freedom I hadn't realized I'd lost. But more than that, I got something harder to reclaim. Respect. For myself. For my strength to stand tall, even when the world tried to knock me down. Ashley walked away with nothing but the remnants of her choices. And me? I was free. The days after the divorce were a strange kind of peace. Not the quiet calm you hope for, but the heavy stillness that follows a storm where everything's changed, but nothing feels quite real yet. I had the house, the kids, the respect I clawed back from ashes. But inside, a part of me was still burning, a slow, relentless fire fueled by betrayal, humiliation, and rage. You learn a lot about yourself in moments like those. About how far you're willing to go before the scales tip. About the cold clarity that can sharpen your mind, and the darkness that can creep in when you're left alone with your thoughts. I tried to keep my distance. Tried to move on. But there was a shadow following me, an echo of what she'd done, the promises broken, the nights spent doubting every smile, every word. It wasn't enough. One night, I found myself back at the bar where it all began, the place Ashley and Chase used to meet. Not to confront them, but because I needed to feel something real, something raw. I watched from the shadows as they laughed, oblivious to the wreckage they'd left behind. Then I felt it, the surge I'd tried to bury. The thirst for more than just legal victories or quiet satisfaction. I wanted her to see me, not as the man she thought she could break, but as a force she couldn't ignore. I started planning again. Not with lawyers this time, but with my own hands. I hired people to watch, to follow, to gather every piece of information, every secret, every lie, every weakness. The deeper I dug, the more I realized how much Ashley thought she'd won. How many lives she'd tangled in her web. And how far I was willing to go to unravel it all. One evening, I sat alone, reviewing files and photos, piecing together a puzzle of deception. The more I saw, the clearer it became. Ashley wasn't just cheating. She was manipulating, using, destroying lives to cover her tracks. And that was the moment I knew. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. But justice on my terms. The line between right and wrong blurred. I wasn't a vigilante. Not yet. But I was a man who'd been pushed too far. I started making calls to people she thought were safe. Friends who'd been lied to. Colleagues who'd been blindsided. family members who'd been betrayed. Each conversation was a piece of the chess game. And with every move, the pressure mounted. Ashley's world began to crumble faster than before. She called me one night, voice shaky, unsure. "Logan, please. This has to stop." But I was done listening, done forgiving. I told her, "It stops when you face what you've done." She begged. She pleaded. I hung up. The final act was approaching. One cold night, I watched as she stepped out of a taxi, alone and vulnerable. I followed from a distance, silent and unseen. She entered a rundown motel, far from the luxury she once flaunted. Inside, the weight of her choices caught up with her. And for once, I felt nothing but pity, because I knew the end was near. The next day, the police showed up at her door. Not for me, but for the mess she'd made. The whispers in the office became shouts. The calls from her family stopped altogether. And me? I stood tall, no longer a victim, but a man reborn from the ashes of betrayal. I didn't seek violence. I didn't crave chaos. I took what was mine with patience, with precision, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in the fight. It's in the quiet power of survival. After the police got involved, things spiraled fast. Ashley's careless arrogance turned to desperation. She tried to patch fences, but the bridges were already ashes. Her friends stopped returning calls. Her family distanced themselves quietly, like removing a loose thread before the whole sweater unravels. The firm she worked for launched their own quiet investigation, led by cold suits who made it clear loyalty was a one-way street. And Chase? Well, he disappeared like the coward he was, leaving her to face the storm alone. I stayed in the shadows, watching the fallout with the detached satisfaction of a man who had given the world exactly what it deserved. But amid the ruin, I found something unexpected: clarity. The anger that once consumed me gave way to a clearer sense of purpose. My kids needed stability. I needed peace. And that meant building something new from the wreckage. The first step was simple but hard: forgiveness. Not for Ashley, that ship had sailed, but for myself. I let go of the fantasies of retribution that had kept me chained to the past. I focused on my kids, my work, and myself. I rebuilt the life she tried to steal. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and saw a man who had been broken but refused to stay that way. Friends came back. Old wounds healed. I dated again, not recklessly, but with a new wisdom that came from surviving hell and still standing. Life wasn't perfect. It never is. But it was mine. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But real revenge isn't about violence or drama. It's about living well despite everything. It's about reclaiming your story and telling it on your terms. A few months after the dust settled, I found myself at a party. Ashley was there too, different now. No longer the queen of her little world, but just a woman forced to reckon with the cost of her choices. I caught her eye across the room. No words. No confrontation. Just a slow, steady smile. Because I had one. Not by breaking her, but by refusing to be broken. That was my revenge. Quiet. Complete. Unshakable.